Reaperman here. I'm a big fan of the more exotic side of arcade sticks, or fight sticks as some call them. Somehow, I don't have any really nice ones for Super Nintendo. But since I've recently pre-ordered the Analog Interactive Super NT, which is that new FPGA Super Nintendo by Kevtris, my attention is shifted back towards this system a bit. I'll show off a couple that I do own, and maybe someday I'll build myself some kind of custom pad hat controller or something. So for years, I've had a couple of these Capcom sticks. You'll see these called the Capcom Power Stick Fighter or some variation of those words. According to the printing on mine, it's officially called the Capcom Fighter Power Stick for Exciting Entertainment Computer Games. And that's just awesome. It features a clicky micro switch stick here in the left with a 4 to 8 way mode switch. Now that switch doesn't really do what I expect or want it to do. The gate stays 8-way, so it must just ignore diagonals electronically or something. That's kind of lame. Standard start and select buttons are here in yellow, and way over on the green side here are the variable turbo and slow-mo buttons. These are the main action buttons with, they each have a neat little LED next to each indicating stuff like turbo status and whether or not they're being pressed. And they've got kind of this mushy feeling micro switch that's soldered to a board underneath them. And they're also a little bit smaller than one would hope for. Oh, and up here is my price tag, $14.95. I'm a bit weird in that I love leaving price tags on things, and I also really like seeing things like kids' names or initials on the stuff that I pick up. It just kind of adds to the story. So over here on the back appears to be, I don't know, maybe a vestigial battery door that doesn't appear to be user accessible in this particular model. But now the real star of the show is the detachable cord socket up here. It allows this stick with the proper cord to hook to a wide variety of systems. I've got the cords for NES and Super NES, but there are cables for most of the other major systems of the day, including some oddballs like the FM Towns. There's even an infrared wireless adapter for the thing if you feel the need to put that kind of misery into your life. Interestingly, this is the pack-in stick on Capcom's CPS Changer game console. I've only seen one of them, and that was on display in a game store in Madison, Wisconsin, of all places, back in the late 90s. I still remember when I saw it, so the system's kind of a big deal. The CPS Changer was a competitor to SNK's Neo Geo AES, where Capcom brought truly arcade-quality gaming into the home for an appropriate price. And if you thought it was expensive back then, definitely don't go shopping for one now. My eBay save searches all tell me that getting a setup together to run just the pack-in game is over $3,000 US. That's too rich for me. But being a Neo Geo competitor, it's no surprise then that this stick really does feel about the same grade as the stock SNK sticks. The plastic, it kind of drums about the same, and the parts, while they're somewhat reminiscent of arcade parts, aren't really close to that level. Capcom Power Stick is a solid effort, and in the running for the nicest pack-in controller ever, but not really what I've been after. So moving on to better controllers, my renewed Super NES interest sent me shopping, and I wound up with the QJ Topfighter here. For those wondering, QJ stands for Quality Joystick, and this was the top of their range. The Topfighters were supposedly released in a limited run of 20,000. Mine is number 7478. Again, I really do love a good story. So here's a magazine ad for one. They retailed for 70 British pounds in probably 1992 or 1993. After doing some calculations, that's about $170 today, which probably feels about right. It's within the realm of possibility anyway. The first thing to notice on it is that the Topfighter features kind of a sheet metal construction. It's heavy and it's a sturdy stick with lots of echo and sharp pokey edges everywhere. So it's probably time for that tetanus booster. I also suspect this controller uses a bit more power than the Super NES expects it to. This isn't normally a problem, but when I'm specifically using the menu in Retro USB Super Power Pack, certain controller inputs cause the system to just instantly reset. How's that for a random oddity? So let's have a look at this stick's main trick. It starts with these three red buttons here, and all this junk up in this corner. See, in addition to the usual turbo and slow-mo, this stick records and plays back macros. How about them apples? So you got these three macro buttons for three moves, but remember that Hadoken you're wanting to throw could use one of these buttons to execute on each side, so four buttons would have been super handy, but whatever, we got three. Also, it forgets your recorded macros when it powers off, so you'll have to re-record them all the time. Truthfully, the macros are generally more trouble than they're worth, and there can still be some execution issues with them. All of that macro tech might look a little familiar. It was improved and reused on QJ's later and much more common controller, BSN Program Pad. Looks like I paid $3.95 for this one at some point. In addition to the three macro buttons, this pad also has pre-programmed moves for Street Fighter and Fatal Fury, which is handy so you don't have to keep re-entering them. Just make sure to get a copy of the manual for the pre-programmed move list. Like the Topfighter, this controller has a fairly useful LCD readout showing which buttons are currently being pressed and which are turboed, etc. As a kid, I thought these displays were just the neatest thing, and I think it's the best part of the whole gimmick. Moving on to the rest of the stick, here are the face buttons. All the face buttons come with stiff springs and overly clicky switches, and they're just a hoot. Part of me wants to swap in some cherry switches and maybe IL buttons, but the other part of me just can't stop grinning at the neat feeling they've created here. Unscrewing the case and looking at the insides, these switches look a lot like HAP or IL controls. They don't feel like it, but they're of similar kind of construction. The weird switches themselves are soldered in instead of using a disconnect, and are missing the third lead that we normally see on this type of switch, which is the normally closed connection. Arcade applications tend not to use those anyway, so whatever. One thing that I find interesting is that there's a separate ground for each switch. Maybe that's for the turbo, or maybe it was just easier to get them properly constructed that way. Since we're already in here, let's have a look at this weird stick. This is a real oddball, and if you're hoping to swap it out for something that's not totally unique, let me sink your ship right now. It's not going to happen. Just enjoy the stick for what it is. So as you can see, it's mounted on three legs instead of the usual four. That plastic circle where the gate usually is actually the stick's pivot point. There's no good way to get a screwdriver on the shaft to twist the ball top off. So why would you need to mod or replace the stick? Well, under the dust washer is a rounded square cut in the sheet metal. This is actually the stick's gate, and yes, it's on top of the stick, which is stupid. It's really stupid because the case is hollow and made of sheet metal, so headphone users, here's your 2-second warning. Sounds like a real precision piece of work, right? I would have been pissed if I had paid big money for this thing back in the day. Also, because the stick is so small, the actual shaft, it gets deep into the diagonals, giving the stick some legitimate execution problems. Don't worry, I'm gonna fix this. The square gate is exactly ½ an inch on the side, which is handy. I went about fixing it in two ways. Plan A was to use these. They're ½ inch brass grommets for tarps. Problem is, I couldn't easily get the ball top off, and I scratched up my shaft trying because I couldn't get a screwdriver on the bottom of it. Plan B consisted of these soft airlock grommets for brewing or canning or something. I cut one with scissors, shoved it around the gate, and hold on, listen to this. Not half bad, am I right? It's also much easier to execute moves with this rubber gate in there too. So those are my two types of Super NES arcade controllers. Both are okay, but a bit lacking in some ways, and I'd really like to get something really special for this system someday. In the days ahead, I look forward to playing more of this system whenever my Super NT arrives. I'm especially looking forward to the crystal clear footage since even with SCART, my Super NES output is a little soft.